We no longer need to spend so much time asking whether we have a seat at the table. We need to ask whether our contributions at the table is changing the quality of the decision. I always tell the CEO and my C-suite stakeholders, well-being and performance are not competing agendas. A burnt out workforce is not particularly a very sophisticated growth strategy. I think the default question that we have right now with AI is asking, well, now we have these tools coming in. Do we still need these people? That is the wrong question, in my opinion. In my opinion, the better question is, we have these AI tools. Now, what do we want the people to spend more of their time doing in order to elevate our deliverables and make sure that we are servicing our customers better?
You're very welcome to another episode of the Hiring Excellence Podcast. My name is Johnny Campbell. I'm your host for the podcast and CEO of Social Talent. Today, we're going to be talking about the strategic shift in HR. What strategic shift, I hear you asking? Well, wait a few minutes. You're going to find out all about it, and hopefully you'll recognize it, as it's a pretty important shift in HR, and it impacts talent acquisition, and all the other parts of HR. Joining us to kind of tee up this discussion and discuss his own background, we've got Ray Chaaya. Ray is joining us from Zurich in Canada. I actually used to be an insurance recruiter back in the day. And so Zurich I can't remember if they were one of my clients or one of the companies I poached from, probably both over the years. So I may know a lot about Zurich, but I'm going to get Ray to tell you a bit more about the company if you don't already own a policy with them or have some sort of engagement with them. Ray, you're very welcome. I believe you're joining us from Toronto, Canada this morning. You might introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Zurich, how long you've been there, the business, and particularly the business in Canada.
Thank you, Johnny. First of all, happy to be here, and thank you for having me. A little bit about me. So I am currently in the role of VP of Talent and Culture for Zurich Canada. So Zurich Canada being part of the Zurich Insurance Group, global insurance company, primarily property and casualty, but we do all sorts of insurance in different parts of the world. In Canada, we are considered a larger business. We're about 1,000 people, just under 1,000 people now. Globally, we are over 50,000 people. We are in over 70 countries with even more satellite offices in the countries where we don't have footprint. So quite a large insurer globally. My oversight is specifically talent and culture for the Canada business. So that means overseeing talent acquisition, talent development, talent management, as well as our engagement and culture portfolio. So diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, employee engagement, as well as community partnerships and impact. So I look at it as the entire employee cycle from entry to exit. I oversee that employee experience.
And Ray, does the HR function more focused on the local executive needs, or is it aligned to a global HR strategy, or a bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of a hybrid, I would say. We are obviously part of the group, and so some of it does trickle down from Switzerland down to all the countries. But the model is really, you take the strategy, you take the model, and then you localize it to fit your specific needs. Specifically because the different countries will manage different types of insurance. So, for example, in some countries they do life insurance, for example, whereas we in Canada we do not. We do primarily commercial property and casualty, which is a different kind of business model. So it's a little bit of both, I would say.
How did you find yourself working in Zurich, Canada, in talent and culture? Like, how did you get into HR and talent and culture in the first place?
So I was just thinking about this before we started this podcast, and this coming October will be my 20 years in insurance. If you would have told me that I was going to be in insurance when I was 16 years old, I would have laughed at you. But here we are 20 years later. Although I didn't start out, going to business school or anything of the sort, I actually studied film as well as human behavioral psychology in university. And then worked as an actor. So either my career took a very unexpected turn, or This is an unusually long audition to appear on your podcast, Johnny. I'm not sure. But but all joking aside though, when I think of my career, what really remained consistent throughout the rather unconventional journey um, is my fascination with people. What helps people perform, what gives us a sense of purpose and possibility and hope, why some organizations manage to unlock so much more human potential than others. That's the stuff I really, really love. And this is particularly, I think, an interesting time for HR. We've got AI coming in, changing workforce expectations, pressures for greater productivity. All of these disruptions are forcing us to really question some very old and maybe traditional assumptions about jobs and about careers and about HR operating models. So I am looking forward to getting into all of that with you today.
So, Ray, pre 2020, it's like before 2020, life after 2020 in our world, but pre 2020, a lot of folks in HR were talking about getting a seat at the table. This was a big deal. There was this table everyone wanted a seat at. HR wasn't welcome. Nobody had a seat, and everyone was vying for this seat. And then, come March 2020, for the following few months and years, all of a sudden, the kind of call it the whole sector of HR rose to the fore, and we were kind of leading a lot of initiatives around for the organization. We were dealing with a whole bunch of issues around, first of all, remote working, getting people set up, getting them access, dealing with all their issues, all the stuff that was going on in the world, trying to manage that. There were, of course, layoffs, everything else, but all of a sudden, people were everything. And the HR leaders of these organizations were given not just a seat at the table, they were given the keys to drive a lot of this strategy. Walk me through what that time was like for you and your colleagues in HR, in talent and culture in Zurich, Canada, going back maybe 6 odd years.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I haven't really talked about a lot was in February of 2020, um I stepped into the role of head of employee experience. And I specifically remember that time because people kept saying to me, "Oh, you're getting the fun HR job, the fun HR job." It was all about making sure people had employee engagement opportunities, and it was all about working with nonprofit organizations and creating volunteer opportunities for our employees. And I thought I was walking into like the dream job, and it was all going to be just, let's coast from here till retirement. And 2 weeks after I got the job, it was end of February, and then we went into March. 2 weeks after I got the job, lockdown happened. And to your point, I went from being, the guy in HR that people just brought in to have a great time to seat at the CEO table having to present to our CEO how the company was going to continue doing business with our workforce in a virtual environment. I went from being the unknown in HR to the most important person in HR that very quickly developed a C-suite relationship with our executives. When I look back at that time, and how things have shifted since then, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that we are perhaps now moving away from what became really important back then, which was well-being, mental health. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I said mental health during COVID, I would be living on an island somewhere now because it really became the center of attention for everything. Now, I think the misconception is that we've moved away from that. I don't think we've necessarily moved away from it. I don't think we should move away from it. But what the change has happened from COVID up until now, I think is that we can no longer look at resilience, mental health, well-being as separate employee initiatives or programs from business strategy. I think that those both of those things have become one. And in order for HR to continue being a valuable resource for organizations, we need to bring those two together. We need to consider well-being and consider mental health. But how are those initiatives and how are those well-being employee programs impacting the business and helping the business reach its strategy as well. That is, I think, the biggest shift from what we saw in COVID up until now.
So if I was going to break that down, what I think I'm hearing you say, Ray, is that we launched those initiatives back beginning in 2020 because we had this immediate massive need in front of us, which was one, get the workforce working remotely for the most part, get them access, help them through this enormous stress. People lost siblings, parents, family members, right? It was crazy. They feared for their lives. We didn't know what the future looked like in those early months. For those of you who weren't in COVID, it was kind of some scary times. From that kind of immediate, let's deal with what's right in front of us, to then building out more sustained initiatives and projects around this. Are you saying that that's now kind of become a bit more table stakes? And is it therefore now required to justify these initiatives around, well, where are we going as a business and our strategy? Not just because let's just be clear, it wasn't connected to strategy back in 2020. It was survival, right?
That's
We need to
correct.
be able to get people to work and make sure they're in the right frame of mind to do work. That was just survival mode. And when you come past survival mode and you kind of say, well, we need this ongoing. Now we're saying, well, what are we doing that drives strategy? Um, is that the message? Is that the theme?
You've got it. The challenge now is proving that our ability to move at the speed of the business back then was not just simply emergency adrenaline, right?
Mm.
Um, what we need to be doing now is proving that HR can move like that in order to help the business be better. I always tell the CEO and my C-suite stakeholders, well-being and performance are not competing agendas. A burnt out workforce is not particularly a very sophisticated growth strategy. So if you have a workforce that is burnt out because we're not keeping in mind well-being and resilience and employee benefits, then you are probably not maximizing your resources and you're not able to really tap into people's full potential. And so those two things, to your point, have to come together now and not be separate, which back then were separate because of the emergency need at the time.
Tell me about some of the bigger initiatives, projects that you're seeing come to the fore and connect to strategy that maybe others are also seeing. Because obviously it's not just about, well, we're going to have yoga classes on Thursday and we're going to basically make sure that everyone has a me day every quarter. That stuff might still continue to your point, but that's no longer the core thing. It's not going to be the main project. What are the main big initiatives, projects, challenges that do connect, you think, to strategy for not just Zurich, but you think for a lot of companies out there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think probably the biggest overplayed one right now is AI, right? Um, AI is a big disruptor in the market right now. Employees want to be able to use the AI, but there's a lot of concerns around AI from employees, whether it's trusting the tools, whether it's understanding what the data is doing. If I enter my private data in there, where is it going? What is the company going to do with it? What are these AI companies going to do with it? So I think there's a lot on us as an enterprise, a lot of responsibility that we have to make sure that we are educating our employee base as to what our AI tools are, how they are going to make their lives easier, how they're going to make the business easier, and then how that ultimately ties into the business strategy. If I specifically look at my job in our industry, in the insurance industry, underwriting and claims are probably our two biggest core business departments. Uh, Work that happens there, gathering information, reviewing documents, entering data, conducting analysis, negotiating, building relationships. AI is not going to affect all of those activities equally. It may, automate portions of information and documentation. It may augment analysis and it may increase, let's say the relative value of judgment and negotiation. But at the end of the day, the biggest question that we, as an enterprise, as leaders, that we need to be asking on behalf of our employees is what should people be doing now with these tools so that they can spend their time being more valuable for the business and helping the business achieve its strategy rather than do we still need these people doing these roles? I think the default question that we have right now with AI is asking, well, now we have these tools coming in. Do we still need these people? That is the wrong question, in my opinion. In my opinion, the better question is we have these AI tools. Now, what do we want the people to spend more of their time doing in order to elevate our deliverables and make sure that we are servicing our customers better?
Hiring is harder than it's ever been. More roles, more pressure, less time. Cara is Social Talent's AI hiring assistant, built on 15 years of real hiring expertise. She helps your team stay consistent, stay compliant, and handle more without burning out. Cara doesn't replace your recruiters, she makes them better. Find out what Cara can do for your team at socialtalent.com, your hiring partner for the AI era.
So let me break that down to understand exactly where HR or people and culture fit. Because, there's going to be overlap, I imagine, between each of the business functions. Like there's going to be a head of underwriting, a head of claims, and she or he is going to want to maybe drive an initiative in a certain direction and should have a responsibility for how the work gets done, who does the work. So if I think of all the things where HR could own or touch, maybe you might help me understand where you think it's more ownership and where it's more support. Things like training and enablement on AI probably seems to be more of a HR owns, or your point around here's AI, here's how it works, here's how you can use it. There is the question of who does it? Does a human do it? Does AI do it? That one I'm not sure about. Who owns that? Who supports that? There's what do we have all these people doing to avoid having to lay off people, redeployment, moving people around. There's the kind of forward thinking, where are we going in terms of our org structure 2 years, 4 years? What skills will we need? What people will we need? What will the AI tools do? The strategic planning piece, that maybe might be both parts. Like to name three different areas there, the education, the doing, and the planning. Where does HR sit from an ownership or support point of view, in your view, generally, and maybe specifically so far in Zurich?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I could speak on behalf of Zurich, but I could also, I think this is happening on a much larger scale, is that what we're starting to see is more technology come into the HR space than ever before. And so slowly what we're starting to see is HR blending almost into what used to be IT or transformation. And so though the CTO, the Chief Transformation Officer, and the CPO, your Chief People Officer, are slowly starting to do a little bit of this right now. Now, whether or not they're ever going to completely become one, I think remains to be seen. But there's definitely already some overlap that we're seeing that has happened in the last 5 years. And so what that means is that, to answer your question, there needs to be a lot more collaboration and handover between who starts to work on something, where does the accountability end for that person, who takes it over at what point, and then what does that second half look like. Education, to me, anything that is human based, to me, I mean, it's in our title, human resources. AI can summarize a 40-page PDF for me in a second. But I'm never going to send AI into having a sensitive stakeholder conversation, right? So for me, the question is always how much human judgment, how much emotional intelligence, how much of a human component is there in whatever it is that we're talking about? That is usually a good gauge for me as to where does HR need to plug in more than a technology expert, for example. And so what I'm finding is training, for example, is really a blend because a lot of training has become automated and it's more efficient in many ways when it is automated, but you still need the human to plug itself in the right milestones, the right places to make sure that the learning is happening at the right pace and the way you want it to. So that is a little bit of a blend. It's a little bit of a collaboration between us and the transformation office to say, at what point does HR come in and at what point do we hand it over back to you, etc. It is a blend. It's a hybrid right now.
It's something, I see those companies like Spotify have combined this into a CTPO
Gotcha.
role, which might catch on, might not. Others like Intercom, now called Fin, Atlassian, Upwork, Zillow, they're probably more tech companies
They
and
are.
more mid-size enterprise, less
Yeah.
of the traditional businesses, less massive enterprise of doing that. So I guess maybe it's too early to know if that will take and will take exactly like that. But there definitely is a trend, Ray. I'd agree with you that, and I think um, it's different. There are different areas where you need to focus on. Some areas will be more on the HR side, some more on the technology side, some more on the business side. But where do things like traditional HR functions like COEs and HRBPs and those roles and functions within people and culture, how do they sit within this, or how are they changing with all of this movement towards this convergence of transformation, technology, and the new needs of the business?
Yeah, I think this is evolving by the second. Um, and my because it's also new, my opinion changes day by day on this. But I don't think the future is simply smaller COEs and fewer HRBPs. I think that is too short sighted. I think organizations are going to have to require less transactional HR capacity, more high leverage advisory, consultancy, analytical capabilities. The goal should be fewer unnecessary handoffs and clear accountability um, in order for this to work. So COEs should not be factories that create programs and then ask HRBPs to just communicate those programs. The strongest COEs, even before now, operate like high value internal consultants. They diagnose a need, bring deep expertise, data, external insights, co create a solution with the business that helps to build the capabilities needed for the business. HRBPs at the same time should not be account managers for HR services. We can't just keep routing every people question through HRBPs. Their value comes from understanding the business, seeing patterns in talent, in organization, in culture, and helping leaders make better decisions. So to put it in brief, I guess the COE has to be able to bring the science. The HRBP has to be able to bring the business context. And then together, they need to bring judgment in order to help make decisions.
So I could break it down to three buckets. We love a bucket analogy on this show, Ray. If there's three buckets, right? There's the transactional HR. That bucket's probably AI driven. Could be a chatbot, could be something similar, whatever it looks like. But that transactional, what's the policy on this? How do I handle this situation? What are the rules around this? What's the recommendation? What's the legal advice? How should I manage this process? Where are the buttons? How do I report on this? What are my obligations? Blah, blah, blah. All those kind of voluminous questions that often get thrown at a HRBP. Are you saying that's bucket one, probably automated, probably AI driven? It's rule oriented. The answer will always be the same. There might be complexity in the question, but it will come down to rules written down somewhere, either internal, external, that you need to interpret and then spit back. That's probably best done by a rule oriented AI type system. Bucket two is the HRBP, who is, I know you don't want to use that account manager phrase, but the account manager for everything else, the high value, let's call it concierge, right? Because account manager maybe is more generic. Concierge is for the important stuff, the important high level stuff. That's your go-to person. But that bucket too relies on a number of COEs who bring deep expertise in particular disciplines that we could never expect the HRBP to cover well enough. Is that the kind of framework that they're the three stools, legs of the stool, so to speak, that make up the modern or the evolving HR function?
Yeah, I think, the one area I think that is a perfect example of what you just talked about. In just one area that we're seeing right now is talent acquisition, right? Because there's a lot of admin work in talent acquisition, but there's also a massive relationship building component to talent acquisition. And so, AI can remove a lot of that admin work, the friction of admin, the scheduling, the taking notes, the element of sourcing and drafting. But then there's the element of that relationship building. The recruiter of the future is really going to be individuals that are really efficient at nurturing a relationship and managing human relationships between them and the candidates. Uh, that is where we're seeing suddenly a lot of that admin work that usually we had maybe, an entire team of recruiters doing. Suddenly they don't I need to do a lot of that admin work anymore. So now you have a bunch of people here and you're wondering, well, I could do two things. I could either cut this team down, right? And save some costs, or I could leverage this team to really put their time and effort into really what matters most, which is sourcing, networking, building relationships with potential candidates, really growing those relationships so that when we need these relationships to come into play, we've invested in that human capital. So I think that is where I'm seeing in HR, out of all the different areas of HR, that is where AI seems to have hit the deepest, is the talent acquisition area of the business.
But arguably, it affects nearly everything else. You take, for example, learning and development. A lot of folks would have spent a huge amount of their time designing curriculum, researching, authoring content. That can be done in minutes, maybe with a really complicated task, an hour or two. So, there's tons of examples here, talent development models where you're looking at even how you're basically developing a matrix to understand a certain part of your business and what the different career mapping journeys could look like can be produced really quickly by AI, even mapping folks in there dynamically with an interview from an AI assistant to then map them to different career paths around the organization. So many tasks that are people oriented that you could kind of give over to AI or be heavily supported by AI. But when I think about again, taking the three buckets, we can build and will build more automation in the AI world for different parts of HR. Your point around TA being probably one of the leaders in that is well made. We see it everywhere, but probably all parts of people and culture will eventually give a lot more of their tasks to that bucket. We see that I think the COE bucket, my opinion maybe would be that we kind of know how to build COEs, and that's not going to change massively. Maybe the amount of people in those roles might change or might become more specialist, but largely that's okay. The biggest challenge, I think, is around what we would then call the softer human skills, which you've already hinted towards, whether it's the management of candidates, relationships there, or just the business relationships, the different stakeholders within the sales organization, the underwriting organization, whatever that looks like, the customer services team. How do you manage those relationships? How do you push back on those folks? How do you develop those interpersonal skills, negotiation skills, presentation skills? It's not easy, right? Because they're the ones that are the human skills. How do you approach the gaps that are there around business acumen, around softer skills? Do you think that the existing workforce in HR, broadly speaking, not just Zurich, broadly speaking, in our profession is up for it and already capable? Do you think there are gaps? If so, what are the gaps? And how are you thinking about addressing them? Or how should we think about addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's important to say that just because you can automate everything doesn't mean you should automate everything, right? So I do think, and I think this is something that I'm actually having active conversations about when I'm talking about leadership development. The capability of judgment, it's always been important. But as digitization takes over the world more and more and more, human judgment is going to become a core capability of leadership. Because, of course, we can automate everything, but what makes the most sense and brings the most value to our business strategy? Is it automating everything or is it not? And we're going to have to make those calls as to, yeah, I could do this in 5 seconds, but we really shouldn't be doing this in 5 seconds. We're actually going to not do this in 5 seconds. It's going to take 2 weeks for us to do this because we know it brings more value. One of the biggest areas that we're seeing that tension, I think, is early career. You talked about building those foundational skills. Um, that is very true for interns or people coming out of college that want a job in insurance. We used to have weeks, if not years, in some cases, of people doing these admin jobs in order for them to build their foundation to what could then become a career in underwriting, let's say. Um, what I am seeing now is that early career roles should include analytics, they should include employee experience work, they should include technology, etc. Um, but it's not necessarily exposure to these things that is really helping them. It needs to be real work. So
Mm.
what used to be before, let this person do a job for a couple of years at this level, and then they'll be ready to do it because over time they will naturally understand the job. We are having to look at it in a little bit of a different way. So what you're talking about, what used to be the foundation, is still there. We still have a foundation that has to be built, whether you are a COE in HR trying to learn the business or an early career person trying to learn the business. You still have a foundation that needs to be built, but the way you're learning it has to change. So, for example, when we look at early career, apprenticeship, right? Apprenticeships are never going to go away. Now, in the white collar world, we've never had apprenticeships. Uh, right? That is more of a, if you want to become a carpenter, you do an apprenticeship. If you want to become a business professional, that's not really something that you do. We're going to have to start looking at that. We're going to have to start working better with schools and academic universities and colleges to create an apprenticeship pipeline where people come straight in and do this job. They're not doing an admin version of this job. They're actually doing this job with mentors and leaders that are helping them in order for them to learn it. So the foundation building is still going to be there, but how you achieve it is going to have to be redesigned.
It reminds me of a couple of aspects. One, to take your point around not everything should be automated. We had Elias Albino on the show a couple of months ago from Syngenta. Elias came from running HR business partner team globally into running TA globally. And he also saw the opportunity for automation scheduling in TA, but deliberately made a decision not to automate all of it. He decided to automate roughly 2/3 of it because they realized that that was the role that gave the feeder to the recruiters. It was the training ground, and they needed a training ground. To your point, how do you develop the next generation of these folks? And connecting it to business strategy, it's very expensive to go hire them externally. So you do want to have internal pipelines. Like Zurich could just have a policy of hiring experienced underwriters and actuaries from other businesses and could survive just fine. It'd be bloody expensive. And to business strategy, you'd also be running the risk of not having uniqueness. So I think to connect back to our first conversation around strategy being the driving force in pretty much everything we do in HR at the moment. This isn't just I'd like to have roles for graduates and have a pipeline for the future. This is very business oriented in terms of the business does need a pipeline of future talent. It needs to de-risk from having to source externally. It needs internal folks who understand the business. And you're right, we have to change the model of how we do this. And I think there are other folks I know we have coming on the show in a couple of weeks. We have some of the team from P&G. P&G are well known as kind of largely hiring from within. They have built a business around taking you in at a graduate kind of entry point and building that acumen, not quite as an apprenticeship, but not far off that, that kind of developed internship model where you do get exposed to different parts of the business. You do the work. You're sent out at 21, 22 to do parts of the work with the senior person, but you're thrown in there in a part of the business making those decisions. I think not enough businesses have that model. And you're right, Ray. We need to start thinking, who else does this that we can model in our organizations and copy? And it also feeds into, because I know this is a big passion project, not a passion project, that makes it sound like it's just the thing you wanted to do. A strategic project of yours for the last while has been looking at skills. And we've looked at this on the podcast several times. But where does skills fit into strategy, and how does that
Huge.
work in your context?
Huge, absolutely huge. I think this is probably one of the biggest HR transformations of my career anyway, is what used to be what are the roles we need and how much money do we have to buy these roles, these people, to bring these people in, has now become you have to take it one step earlier. The question is not what are the roles, the question is what skills do we need in order to bring to life the strategy. It all has to start with the business strategy. I have more conversations about capabilities and skills now than I have ever in my entire life. And I think because at the end of the day, the question is what kind of person do we need to bring in? Before we bring in the people, we need to understand what capabilities they need to have, what potential they have. And based on that, can we build and develop them into people and individuals and talent that can bring to life the strategy? And so I think um, that is probably going to be the biggest transformation in dynamic resourcing and workforce planning is how do you understand the strategy, and then look at your system. You have talent acquisition, you have talent management, and you have talent development. Talent acquisition understands the market. They also need to understand the strategy because if they don't understand the strategy, they don't know what kind of potential they need to be looking for in the market. Once they bring in the right potential, talent development has to understand the capabilities needed to bring to life that strategy because then they have to develop that potential into readiness. Talent management has to be able to understand capability in order to say who of the talent is your high potential, who is ready or going to be ready for that succession pipeline, etc. It's all a system, Johnny. Really, I mean, anybody that looks at the talent system as a siloed, this is talent acquisition and they hire people, this is talent management and they manage the performance, has it all wrong and you've lost the plot. It is a complete system and the system has to be tied to the business strategy at its core.
Great hiring doesn't just happen, it's a skill. And skills need practice. Social Talent's learning platform gives your recruiters and hiring managers the knowledge to hire with confidence. Expert-led content built for the way people actually work. Whether you're onboarding a new team or upskilling an experienced one, we've got you covered. Visit socialtalent.com/learning to see what your team could learn next.
Ray, in closing, advice for talent leaders listening to this thinking, I want to progress my career. I see that my career is going to be in many of these areas, either leading all of the areas or combining more of them, whether I'm coming from TA and I'm thinking I need to expand into talent development, or I'm coming from talent development, I need to expand into a wider HR role, into HR business partner, whatever that looks like. What are the core skills of the modern HR business leader that you would recommend people invest in? What have you invested in? What have you developed since 2020, since February 2020, when that nice, cushy employee experience job became one of the most critical, hardest roles in the business?
I would say understanding your business is critical. What HR used to be is it used to be um, you dealt with the people topics, and that was a different. Which is why traditionally we had such a challenge with being at the table because leaders, the C-suite, did not understand the connection between HR and the business strategy. That is why we had to fight to get at the table. But we are now, because we have a seat at the table. COVID accelerated that and put us right at the table. So now the question is, how do you show the value of what we do with the business? So if you do not understand the business, it's going to be very difficult for you to evolve your HR expertise in no matter what you do in HR. So what I was lucky enough that I came from the business. When I first started my career with Zurich, I was in the business and I learned the business and then I moved directly into HR. But for those people that I have now on my team that come as HR professionals that understand the craft of HR, but don't understand the business, I will invest in having them do secondments in the business for 6 months. I will invest in having them do development programs with our business partners because I want them to be able to speak the language and connect what we do from a people perspective with the value that it brings to the business strategy.
I love this, Ray. I really enjoyed the conversation. You've kind of opened my mind to a great, many ways of framing this, but again, keeping it simple. I think we don't need to overcomplicate this. You've framed it in three different buckets that are merging. The connection to strategy is so present. I think it's that business acumen piece and developing that business acumen. Everyone's talking about it. You reminded me of a book I started reading recently called Unreasonable Hospitality, just referencing the name while I'm here, called by a guy called Will Guidara. And Will went on to be himself and his business partner ended up being the number one ranked restaurant in the world. And he opens the story when they were ranked 50 of 50 and disappointed and how they got to being number one. And he talks about his early career in the hospitality industry. And he said he took a kind of dual role in his first year. Literally 5 hours of the day he'd spend in a restaurant, running around, serving, helping out. And the other 5 hours a day he shadowed the CFO and worked in finance. And he said the ability to be able to see spreadsheets and then how the spreadsheet translated into the business, he said, was unbelievable. And it's a foundation of how he thinks about careers. I think, to your point, it translates to everything. You can't just be siloed in finance or HR or marketing. You kind of need to know how it connects with the entire business. That is the magic skill.
Johnny, if I could just add in there, because I think you're absolutely right. It's not even limited to just HR. But I will speak for HR in saying the future of HR, the future of our world, but definitely the future of HR will undoubtedly be more digital, but its value at its core will remain deeply human. And so it will come from judgment, it will come from courage, it will come from curiosity, it will come from empathy, our ability to help people and organizations and help them help leaders navigate uncertainty together. And perhaps, as my final thought now, as I'm speaking out loud, maybe that is the real evolution of HR. We no longer need to spend so much time asking whether we have a seat at the table. We need to ask whether our contributions at the table is changing the quality of the decision.
Ray, I think you've had the last word beautifully. All of that is the best soundbite we can ever ask for, Ray. Thanks for your insight. It's been great to chat with you. I expect your career is going to continue to go places. You've taken the challenge 6 years ago. Thank goodness, for your sake, you ended up in a role that ended being front up center. I think you've enjoyed the ride, obviously, the last 6 years, and far from being over. Here's to the next 20, Ray, in the modern HR role, not necessarily the HR role you maybe went into at the start of your career. Really appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you giving your time today. And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us today and to hearing Ray's conversations. Ray, if anyone wants to reach out to you, any questions, wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm available on LinkedIn. Love to have a conversation about HR related or just how you're doing that day. Welcome all the conversations.
That's Ray Chaaya, Chaaya. We'll find a link to his LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Until next week, take care.
Thank you, Johnny.